She walked in like an ordinary girl. He saw her skin before her soul and kicked her out. But when her billionaire father walked in the next day, everything changed. Ava Richards stepped out of her modest sedan, heart fluttering as she surveyed the elegant facade of Stonebridge Steakhouse. Dim lanterns illuminated a red carpet walkway that led to towering glass doors. She had made a reservation a week earlier, to mark a personal milestone, never imagining she might be turned away. Inside, the restaurant exuded refinement, polished floors, soft jazz, and the enticing aroma of grilled steak. A man in a crisp white shirt, James, manager, stood at a podium, his leather-bound reservation book clutched protectively against his chest. As Ava approached, his gaze flicked over her with a thinly veiled scowl. "Good evening," she said. "I have a reservation under Ava Richards." James flipped through the pages with exaggerated slowness. "I don't see your name here," he announced, voice icily polite. "We're fully booked tonight." Ava's brow furrowed. "That's strange. I confirmed by phone just yesterday." His lips curled into a superficial smile. "Well, it's not in my system. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a different establishment." A few nearby diners glanced in her direction, picking up on the tension. Ava's cheeks warmed. This wasn't her first brush with subtle prejudice, but it stung every time. Still, she met James's stare calmly. "I'm certain my name was on that list," she insisted. "Is there someone else I can speak with?" He let out a short, mirthless laugh. "I'm the manager, so I'm afraid not. I suggest you leave. Before we involve security," her frustration simmered. The condescending note in his voice, that cold scrutiny of her appearance. She had seen it before. "This is unacceptable. I have proof of my reservation." James planted one hand on the podium. "We don't have time for scene makers. Kindly find the door, Ms. Richards." Ava inhaled, reminding herself of her father's words. Stay strong, but remain dignified. Slipping her phone from her purse, she typed a quick message. "I'm giving you one last chance to verify. Otherwise, you'll regret this." He gave a mocking shrug. "Is that a threat?" She shook her head. "No, it's a promise that you're about to learn a hard lesson." James summoned a security guard who hovered at Ava's side. The manager's smug demeanor all but dared her to push back. She pressed the phone to her ear. "Dad," she whispered, "there's a problem at Stonebridge Steakhouse." From the corner of her eye, she noticed James crossing his arms, a triumphant gleam in his gaze. The guard gestured toward the exit. "Please step outside, ma'am," Ava obliged, refusing to be manhandled. She paused under the soft glow of the porch lights, adrenaline coursing through her veins. If James believed he'd brushed off a troublemaker, he was about to discover exactly who he had disrespected. Standing on the sidewalk, Ava ended her call and exhaled. Her father, Carlton Richards, would arrive any moment, and once he did, the real confrontation would begin. Inside the restaurant, James appeared at the window, clearly satisfied he'd rid the place of an unwanted guest. He had no clue that his actions this evening might spell professional disaster. Ava smoothed her dress. It wasn't covered in designer logos, but it was more than suitable. Soon enough, everyone, James included, would learn that she had every right to dine wherever she pleased. And once the truth about her father's formidable status came to light, the arrogant manager would have no choice but to face the consequences of his prejudice. Ava paced outside the restaurant, her breath visible in the cool evening air. Every so often she glanced at her phone, half expecting her father's call. A swirl of emotions flickered in her chest. Indignation at being treated so poorly, anxious relief that her dad was on his way. Despite having experienced subtle bias before, she was still stunned by James's brazen hostility. Moments later, headlights swept across the pavement as a sleek black luxury sedan pulled up to the curb. The rear door opened, and Carlton Richards emerged in a tailored suit that did little to hide his athletic build. Though his expression was calm, His eyes sparked with concern the moment he spotted Ava. He moved to her side, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm here," he said in a low voice. "Are you all right?" Ava forced a small smile. "I'm fine, Dad, just shaken. The manager was unbelievably rude. He claimed I wasn't on the reservation list. He practically kicked me out." Carlton's jaw tightened. He glanced at the imposing front doors of Stonebridge Steakhouse. "Let me handle this." Before Ava could protest, he walked up to the entrance with the self-assured stride of a man accustomed to boardrooms and negotiations. Inside, James had resumed his station at the podium, wearing a smug look of satisfaction. A handful of guests noticed Carlton's arrival and exchanged curious glances. While James didn't recognize him at first, a nearby server stiffened slightly, clearly aware of who Carlton was. "Excuse me," Carlton said, voice polite yet firm. "I need to check on a reservation under the name Richards. My daughter had one, but she was told there was no record." James lifted his gaze lazily, not bothering to mask his annoyance at being interrupted. "Richards, you said?" "We're at capacity, sir." Carlton merely raised an eyebrow. "I'd like you to check again." With a theatrical sigh, James opened the leather-bound book and ran a finger down the list. He snapped it shut after only a moment, turning his attention back to Carlton. "I see no mention of a Richards. As I told that young lady outside, we can't seat random walk-ins." Carlton's gaze darkened. "Random walk-ins? That's your description of my daughter who made a legitimate reservation?" James's lips twitched in a hint of a smirk. "Listen, sir, I don't know who you two think you are, but Stonebridge Steakhouse caters to a certain clientele. Perhaps you'd be happier at a more casual restaurant." A hush fell over the foyer, each onlooker sensing the tension. Carlton kept his composure, but Ava could see anger simmering in his eyes. "I assure you," he said, voice even, "we're quite comfortable in fine dining establishments." James shrugged, tapping his pen on the podium. "I'm sure you think so, but we have standards to maintain, and part of that involves honoring the reservations of our actual patrons." Another server, a young woman in a neat uniform, hovered nearby, clearly distressed by what she was hearing. She appeared torn between her duty to remain silent and her empathy for the unwelcome guests. Still, she made no move to intervene. Carlton's gaze flicked around, noting the hush among the seated diners, the uneasy shifting of staff. He took out his phone. "I'd like to speak to the owner or whoever is truly in charge, right now." A trace of uncertainty crept into James's smug expression. "We don't give out the owner's direct line to anyone who asks." Carlton inhaled slowly, pressing a single button on his phone. "Yes, it's me. I'm at Stonebridge. We have a serious situation here." He paused, eyes never leaving James's face. "I suggest you come down immediately." James scoffed, shaking his head as though this was all an elaborate joke. But Ava stood at her father's side, confident that James's arrogance was about to collide with a reality he never saw coming. As Carlton ended the call, a silence thick with tension settled over the restaurant lobby. The next few minutes, Ava sensed, would determine just how far this confrontation would go, and how dearly James would regret his actions. Carlton ended his call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, fixing James with a steady gaze. The manager's self-assured smirk never wavered, but a hint of uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The air around them felt charged, like a gathering storm no one could ignore. Ava stepped closer to her father. "Who did you call?" she asked, under her breath. Carlton's tone was calm. "Someone who can get the owner here in record time." Several guests looked on, confusion and intrigue evident on their faces. A distinguished couple seated near the hostess stand exchanged whispers, glancing periodically at Carlton's sharp suit and Ava's poised stance. Clearly, this was no ordinary spat over a reservation. James drummed his fingers on the podium. "Look," he said, arching an eyebrow. "I've already explained we're at capacity. I'm not sure why you two insist on making a scene." He shot Ava a condescending glance, adding with a mocking tilt of his head, "You could have saved yourselves some embarrassment by leaving quietly." Carlton inhaled slowly. He wasn't the sort to raise his voice or resort to theatrics. He didn't need to. A quiet confidence emanated from him that made onlookers question their assumptions. "Making a scene is the last thing we want," he replied. "All we asked for was to be seated at a table that was rightfully reserved." James shrugged. "Reservations can get lost. Besides, we maintain the right to refuse service, especially if someone appears to be out of place." Ava stiffened. The transparent implication in James's words was a stab of ice. She opened her mouth to respond, but her father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let him talk," Carlton murmured, eyes never leaving. "James. He'll have to answer for every word." From a corner of the restaurant, the young server who had recognized Carlton earlier began edging closer. She hovered near the podium, face pale. While she didn't speak, it was obvious she wanted to intervene. Each time James directed another barbed comment at Ava and Carlton, the server cringed. After several tense seconds, the front doors swung open. A tall man in a suit, slightly wrinkled as though he'd hurried, stepped in, accompanied by two others. He scanned the room, spotting Carlton immediately. His expression shifted from anxious to apologetic in a heartbeat. "Mr. Richards?" he called, weaving through tables with an air of urgency. "I came as fast as I could. We had no idea." James gaped. "Excuse me, who are you?" The man turned sharply. "I'm Mark Stonebridge, the owner." A stunned hush fell over the foyer. James blinked, looking between Mark and Carlton. "But you never come here unannounced," he sputtered. Stonebridge squared his shoulders, stepping up to the podium. "Normally, I trust my staff to handle our guests professionally. Unfortunately, it seems tonight was an exception." He glanced at Ava, then at Carlton. "Mr. Richards, I apologize for the inconvenience. Had I known you or your family were coming, I would have personally prepared a table." James's face went white. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The sudden realization that he'd insulted a friend, or potentially an investor, of his boss sent a visible tremor of panic through him. Carlton offered Mark a curt nod. "I appreciate you getting here quickly, but my daughter and I have been treated disrespectfully from the moment she walked in. I intend to ensure this doesn't happen to any other patron, ever again." Stonebridge's features hardened. He turned to James. "What exactly did you say to Ms. Richards, and why on earth would you deny her entry if she had a valid reservation?" James fumbled for an explanation, sweat beading at his temple. Her name wasn't in the book, and Stonebridge held up a hand, cutting him off. "We'll straighten out the details in a moment." Shifting his focus back to Carlton and Ava, he bowed his head in contrition. "Please, let's find a quieter spot to talk. We'll make this right, I promise." But as Ava stared into the manager's startled eyes, she couldn't help wondering if any apology would truly erase the sting of blatant prejudice. And from the way her father stood, posture rigid and voice measured, she suspected James's biggest regret was only just beginning. Mark Stonebridge led Carlton and Ava toward a private lounge area behind the main dining room, leaving James at the podium to grapple with his sudden crisis. As they weaved through tables, a hush seemed to follow, diners lowering their voices in curiosity. Ava could feel the weight of every stare, but kept her head high. Her father walked beside her, radiating calm authority. Once inside the lounge, Mark shut the door, effectively muffling the soft clinks of silverware and ambient chatter beyond. The room was plush, velvet armchairs, subdued lighting, and a large portrait of Stonebridge's late grandfather on the wall, symbolizing the family legacy. Mark offered them seats at a small round table set with water glasses. "I'm deeply sorry," Mark began, hands clasped together. "I've known your father for years, Ms. Richards, though we've only met briefly. I had no idea you would be dining with us tonight. This is inexcusable." Ava exchanged a quick glance with her father, feeling a wave of relief that someone with actual authority was finally listening. Still, the sting of James's behavior clung to her like a stubborn shadow. "Your manager made it clear he didn't think I belonged here," she said, her voice steady. "That was enough reason for him to deny my reservation." Mark grimaced. "I'll see to it he's dealt with. Stonebridge Steakhouse has a strict policy against discrimination of any kind." Carlton leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. "I appreciate the apology, Mark, but we need assurance this won't just blow over. If James is treating my daughter like this, imagine how many other patrons he's quietly turned away or humiliated." Mark nodded, gaze troubled. "Trust. Me, I understand. My father built this restaurant chain on values of hospitality and respect. I won't let one person undo that legacy." Before anyone could say more, the door cracked open. The same young server who'd hovered at the podium peeked in, eyes flicking nervously between the three. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Stonebridge," she said softly, "but James wants to speak with you right away. He's, well, not taking this well." Mark's features hardened. "Let him stew for a moment. We're handling something more important." The server nodded, concern etched on her face. Ava offered the young woman a small smile of thanks for trying to do her job in the midst of chaos. After she left, Ava turned back to Mark, summoning courage to voice what had truly hurt her. "It wasn't just that he claimed I wasn't on the list," she explained. "He made it very clear he thought I didn't fit the upscale image he had in mind. He wouldn't give me a chance to prove otherwise. It felt personal." A flash of anger crossed Mark's eyes. "I'm outraged to hear that. We never want any guest to feel unwelcome because of how they look." Carlton exhaled, wrestling with his own frustration. "James's attitude is unacceptable, but he's a symptom of a deeper issue. People who think they can judge someone's worth based on appearance." Mark placed his palms flat on the table. "Then let's make an example of him. I'm prepared to offer you a formal, public apology and disciplinary action against James. If necessary, he'll be terminated." Ava and Carlton exchanged glances. The tension in the room lightened just a fraction. Yet Ava couldn't shake the knot in her stomach. "I don't want someone to lose their job without cause," she said quietly. "But if he's truly discriminating against customers, it can't be ignored." Mark bowed his head. "Agreed. If it helps, we can gather statements from other staff. Frankly, if he's behaved this way with you, he's likely repeated it. I'll do whatever it takes to rectify the situation." A slow, tentative sense of relief washed over Ava. At least the owner seemed sincere. But she couldn't deny a lingering question. Would any of this have happened if she weren't the daughter of a powerful man? If she hadn't had Carlton to call? Would James's prejudice have prevailed? Carlton read the hesitation in her eyes and gently clasped her hand. "Mark, we appreciate your swift response. Let's see what James has to say for himself before we decide on further actions." A knock sounded on the lounge door. Another staff member. Probably the server again. Mark rose to answer it, tossing Ava and Carlton a reassuring look. Outside, the tension was palpable, but in this small, private room, a resolution was beginning to form. Ava hoped it would be enough to ensure no one else had to endure the humiliation she'd experienced tonight. "All right," Mark said, hand on the doorknob. "Shall we face him together?" His voice was grim but resolute, and Ava knew the confrontation awaiting them on the other side would determine whether justice would truly be served. Mark Stonebridge guided Ava and Carlton back into the main dining area, where the hum of conversations and the soft clink of cutlery provided a stark contrast to the tension simmering beneath. James stood by the hostess podium, arms folded, face set in a mixture of anger and anxiety. Several diners watched surreptitiously, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Ava took in a steadying breath. Her heart pounded at the prospect of facing James again, but she wanted to see justice done, both for herself and for anyone else he might have slighted. Carlton, a steady presence at her side, nodded slightly, as if encouraging her to stay composed. Mark approached James, voice controlled. "We're going to settle this matter right now in front of everyone if needed. You've been accused of mistreating Ms. Richards. I want your explanation." James cast a quick glance at Ava, a flicker of resentment crossing his features. "I was following protocol. We had no record of her reservation," he insisted. Then, with a dismissive wave, he added, "I have the right to refuse service if I suspect she doesn't belong." "Doesn't belong?" Carlton echoed, his tone calm but steely. "Are you saying you judged her unfit to dine here simply by how she looks?" James blinked, cornered. I never said that exactly," Mark interjected. "James, do you realize who Mr. Richards is?" James gave a half-hearted shrug. "Some executive, I guess, but that doesn't change the fact—" Carlton's expression remained unreadable. "You didn't care about a legitimate reservation. You assumed you could brush off my daughter, like she was beneath you." A few staff members huddled nearby, clearly torn between loyalty to their manager and unease about his behavior. The young server, the one who had seen Carlton's importance, worked up the courage to step forward. She clutched a small notepad to her chest and cleared her throat. "Mr. Stonebridge," she addressed her boss quietly, "I remember taking Ms. Richards's call. She specifically asked for a table near the window. I wrote it down in our system." Her voice faltered, and she looked at James apologetically. "Somehow, that entry got deleted." Ava felt a surge of gratitude toward the server for speaking up. James, however, stiffened. "Deleted? Why would I do that? That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Mark asked pointedly. He held up a tablet that an assistant had just handed him. "We keep digital backups of all reservations, James. Your login was used to modify Ms. Richards' booking this afternoon." A ripple of unease passed through the onlookers. Carlton's jaw tightened. Ava's pulse quickened with fresh outrage. It was one thing to deny her, another entirely to erase her record to cover his tracks. James's face paled. I must have made an error. It wasn't intentional." Mark exhaled, a note of anger edging his voice. "Intentional or not, you've lied to a loyal customer and treated Ms. Richards with outright disrespect." He paused, glancing at Ava. "And you've done so in a way that strongly suggests discrimination." All around them, conversations petered out. The rest of the restaurant seemed to hold its breath, forks frozen midair, eyes locked on the spectacle unfolding by the podium. Carlton stepped forward, hands clasped calmly. "What you did isn't just a breach of hospitality. It could be grounds for legal action," he said, voice so level it sent a chill through the air. "I'm here to see that my daughter gets the respect she deserves." James attempted to speak, but no words came. For the first time that evening, he looked genuinely alarmed. His gaze darted around, searching in vain for any ally or escape. Mark shifted his stance, prepared to deliver a decision on the spot. Yet, before he could speak, another figure emerged from the kitchen corridor. A tall, older man in chef's whites. He hurried over, concern evident in his eyes. "Is everything all right?" he asked, voice carrying a hint of authority earned through years of commanding a high-end kitchen. Ava exchanged a glance with Carlton. Her nerves still rattled, but a renewed sense of conviction steadied her. They were on the brink of a resolution, or at least the next chapter in this confrontation. And from the way James's face had lost all color, it was clear he finally understood just how badly he'd miscalculated. Chef Bernard Devereaux approached the tense gathering, his brow creased in concern. He was known throughout the city for his culinary brilliance, Stonebridge's shining star who attracted VIPs and celebrities. Glancing from Mark Stonebridge to Carlton and Ava, then finally to James, he sensed a problem far bigger than a simple reservation error. "What's going on?" Chef Bernard asked quietly, wiping his hands on a spotless apron. Mark gestured toward Ava. "There's been a discriminatory incident involving Ms. Richards. Her reservation was deliberately deleted, and she was refused service by James." Bernard's gaze flicked over James, who looked increasingly uncomfortable under the scrutiny. "Mr. Stonebridge," the chef said, choosing his words carefully, "this establishment prides itself on hospitality. If a guest, any guest, was turned away unfairly, that's a failure on our part." James shifted his stance. "I never intended to discriminate. I just thought she wasn't on the list." The pitch of his voice rose defensively. "Maybe. I got suspicious she was trying to dine here without a real reservation." Carlton studied him, anger coiled beneath his calm exterior. "You made it about how my daughter looked, not about a missing name on a list. You implied she didn't belong in an upscale restaurant. That's pure prejudice." A hush settled again among nearby patrons. Some exchanged outraged whispers. Others merely watched in silence. Ava could sense empathy in their eyes. This was no trivial misunderstanding. Chef Bernard cleared his throat. "I've worked with Mr. Stonebridge for years," he said, addressing both Ava and Carlton. "This is the first time I've encountered such a blatant violation of our ethos. I assure you, we do not condone what happened." Carlton nodded coolly. "We appreciate your sincerity. However, apologies won't fix the damage if staff members feel free to discriminate at will. My daughter was humiliated at the front entrance." Mark's face hardened. "I will take decisive action. James, you've put us all at risk. Legal, reputational, and moral. I can't ignore that." James paled further. He swallowed hard, as though grappling with the reality of losing his job. I'm sorry. I didn't realize who they were." Ava narrowed her eyes. "So, if my father weren't a known businessman, you'd still have thrown me out? That makes it worse." Chef Bernard exhaled heavily, turning to Ava. "Ms. Richards, I can't undo what happened, but please allow me to personally prepare your meal tonight. Let me serve you the way you deserve." Her gaze flicked to Carlton. She was touched by the chef's offer. He genuinely seemed to care. Yet the hurt still lingered. "Thank you, Chef. But the issue goes deeper than one meal." "I understand," Bernard replied softly. "I only hope you'll give us a chance to show that most of us here respect our guests." Carlton stepped forward, addressing Mark. "We're not vindictive people, but something must change to ensure no other guest suffers this indignity. How do you propose we move forward?" Mark inhaled. "First, James will be relieved of his duties pending an internal review. I'll issue a formal apology to Ms. Richards and to you, Mr. Richards, in writing and publicly if you wish. Second, we'll implement mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff. Finally, any further incidents will be grounds for immediate termination." A flicker of relief crossed Ava's features, though her heart still felt heavy. She glanced at James, who stared at the floor, face ashen. Part of her felt a sting of pity. He'd done this to himself, but losing a job was no small matter. Still, she reminded herself of the humiliating moment he'd dismissed her so casually. After a measured silence, Carlton nodded. "That's a start. But if we see this reoccurring or hear of another patron facing similar treatment, it won't happen again," Mark promised, conviction ringing in his voice. Chef Bernard placed a hand on Ava's shoulder. "Let me make your evening special. Even if it's just a small step toward healing, it's something." Ava looked up at her father, seeking his silent approval. He gave her a gentle smile. Together, they began following the chef toward a private table, leaving James and his trembling excuses behind. Despite the lingering tension, Ava couldn't help but sense that, for at least this night, prejudice had met its match and lost. Chef Bernard guided Ava and Carlton along a softly lit corridor to an exclusive private dining nook set apart from the bustling main floor. A single flickering candle graced the table's center, reflecting off polished cutlery and sparkling wine glasses. It felt intimate, peaceful, an ironic contrast to the recent commotion by the hostess podium. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," Chef Bernard said, gesturing to 2 plush chairs. "I'll bring our finest amuse-bouche shortly." Ava settled into her seat, heart still pounding from the confrontation. She could sense her father's gaze, calm and reassuring. He'd always taught her to stand firm against injustice, yet a part of her still trembled at how viciously James had tried to bar her from a table she rightfully reserved. Carlton leaned in, speaking low. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" She inhaled slowly, letting the ambient warmth of the space steady her nerves. "Better now, but I still can't believe how quickly he judged me. What if you hadn't shown up?" A pang of anger flared in her voice. "He would have simply gotten away with it." Carlton placed a hand over hers. "You stood your ground, and that's important. We can't let people like James go unchallenged." Before Ava could respond, the door to the private nook opened. A uniformed server entered with a tray of steaming appetizers, delicate morsels arranged like edible art. She smiled politely, though Ava noticed the lingering stress in her eyes, likely from witnessing the fiasco earlier. "On behalf of Stonebridge Steakhouse," the server began gently, "please accept these complimentary dishes from Chef Bernard." "It's our hope you'll still enjoy the evening despite what happened," Ava offered a small smile. "Thank you." The server quietly set the appetizers down, then vanished with the promise to return soon with the next course. Carlton lifted one appetizer to his plate, but he paused before taking a bite. "I know Mark will handle James, but do you want to press charges? We have grounds to file a formal complaint." A ripple of tension worked its way across Ava's shoulders. "I'm not sure. I don't want to ruin anyone's life over this, but at the same time, he nearly ruined mine. At least for tonight. If we don't hold people accountable, nothing changes." Carlton nodded, respect in his eyes. "We can discuss it further after dinner. For now, let's try to find a moment of peace." He gestured at the elegant spread before them. They began sampling the appetizers, miniature lobster tarts, truffle-infused bites of steak, artfully drizzled sauces bursting with flavor. Despite her lingering anger, Ava felt a wave of appreciation for Chef Bernard's hospitality. Each bite was exquisite, crafted to impress. Still, a hint of unease tugged at her. She couldn't shake the memory of James's sneer, the casual cruelty in his tone. She kept recalling the way he'd addressed her as if she had no right to exist in his carefully curated world. Midway through a sip of sparkling water, Ava noticed movement at the edge of the nook. Peering over her shoulder, she glimpsed James, standing beyond the threshold. It appeared he was hesitating, perhaps unsure if he was allowed in. His face looked drawn, eyes rimmed with regret. Carlton set down his glass, jaw tightening. "What does he think he's doing here?" Ava's pulse ticked up. In silence, she watched James edge closer, hands twitching at his sides. When their eyes met, he flinched as though confronted by the reality of his own wrongdoing. She sensed no bravado now, only desperation and guilt. "Mr. Richards," he began softly, stepping into the warm glow of the private nook. "Ms. Richards, His voice faltered. Chef Bernard, who must have followed him, appeared behind James, arms folded. "I'll give you a minute," the chef said, glancing at Ava and Carlton as if seeking approval. Ava exchanged a look with her father. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear whatever James had to say, but maybe this conversation was inevitable. She nodded stiffly. James swallowed, clearly struggling for composure. I wanted to say I'm sorry. What I did was unacceptable. I know I acted out of prejudice, and I deeply regret it. A muscle ticked in Carlton's jaw, but he didn't respond yet. Ava felt her own chest tighten. She had demanded accountability, and here he was, standing before them, stripped of his previous arrogance. The question was whether his apology was genuine or simply an attempt to salvage his position. Only time would tell if remorse could undo the sting of his blatant discrimination. For now, though, Ava waited, heart pounding, to see if James's contrition would ring hollow, or if, by some chance, he truly meant every word. Ava's heart pounded as James stood before her, the warm glow of the private nook revealing the anxiety etched across his features. Moments ago, he'd been a force of dismissal and contempt. Now he appeared far from confident, almost vulnerable, as though fully aware of the damage he'd done. He swallowed, clearing his throat. I'm truly sorry, he repeated, glancing between Ava and Carlton. I never should have judged you. My actions, they were inexcusable. Ava studied him, her emotions torn. She could still hear his scornful words echoing in her mind, see the look of smug superiority when he tried to throw her out. But she also believed in giving people the chance to atone. If their remorse was genuine, Carlton's gaze was cool, his arms folded. We appreciate apologies, James, but do you realize how serious this is? Not just for you personally, but for any guest you might have turned away without a second thought? James nodded, eyes downcast. I do. I let my biases get the better of me. When I saw Ms. Richards come in alone, dressed, well, not in what I'd expect from someone dining here, I made assumptions. His voice shook. I've seen scammers try to sneak into upscale places, so He paused, swallowing again. I just reacted. Ava's jaw tightened at the mention of her attire. It struck her how society ingrains these harmful stereotypes. People assume wealth or status based on outward appearances, perpetuating discrimination. So, because I wasn't decked out in designer labels, you decided I couldn't possibly be a valid customer, she said quietly. James nodded miserably. Yes, and I can't take that back. But I want to make it right however I can. Chef. Bernard lingered by the door, observing the exchange. He wore an expression that was both stern and sympathetic, as though he saw the possibility of redemption, but also knew accountability was paramount. Carlton let out a measured breath. You can't undo what you did, James. But perhaps you can learn from it. We're not vindictive people. Yet you need to face the consequences, and not just by losing your job. You need to change your mindset. James looked up, his voice trembling. I'm willing to do anything to prove I've learned my lesson. If Mr. Stonebridge will let me, I'll take whatever training or discipline is required. I don't want to be someone who discriminates like this. Ava exchanged a glance with her father. There was no denying James seemed sincere in his remorse, but the wound was still fresh. It's going to take time, she said, her voice edged with residual hurt. Words alone won't fix the harm you've caused. James bowed his head. I understand. He hesitated, then took a tentative step forward, extending his hand. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I'm sorry, Ms. Richards. I truly am. For a moment, Ava considered leaving him hanging, a tiny part of her still raw with anger. But her father's guiding presence reminded her that grace could be a powerful choice. She inhaled, then nodded. I accept your apology, she said, softly, though she didn't take his hand. But forgiveness doesn't erase the responsibility you bear. He lowered his hand, lips pressed tight in a grim line of acceptance. Thank you. A tense silence followed, broken by Chef Bernard's quiet words. I'll see to it that James's apology isn't just lip service. With a somber nod, He motioned for James to leave the private nook. The manager, his shoulders visibly weighed, down, exited slowly as though stepping away from the life he'd once known. Ava and Carlton exchanged a silent look. The tension in the air remained, but a subtle sense of relief crept in. Perhaps progress had been made. She could still taste the bitter tang of discrimination, but maybe, just maybe, an ounce of change had begun to stir. And that was better than nothing at all. A soft knock at the door drew Ava's attention away from the swirling mix of relief and lingering hurt. Mark Stonebridge re-entered the private nook, his expression earnest yet weighed down by the gravity of what had transpired. He carried a slim folder in one hand. "I wanted to check in on you both," he said, offering a subdued smile, "and to discuss next steps." Carlton gestured for him to sit. "We appreciate everything you've done so far," he began, his tone clipped but polite. "Still, we need to ensure no guest experiences this kind of prejudice again." Ava leaned back in her chair, arms folded protectively. The memory of James's sneer, his assumption that she didn't belong, still clung to her. She found herself torn between compassion for a man desperately apologizing and anger for the humiliation he'd caused. Mark nodded, glancing at the folder in his grasp. "I've drafted an official statement that acknowledges the incident and promises both disciplinary action and stronger anti-discrimination protocols. We'll circulate it internally and, if necessary, release it to the public. I want you to see it first." He slid the folder across the table. Ava watched as Carlton opened it, scanning the neatly typed paragraphs. Silence stretched, punctuated only by the muffled clink of dishes from the main dining room. Chef Bernard hovered nearby, discreetly checking that they had everything they needed. After a moment, Carlton handed the folder to Ava. She skimmed the statement, noting the key points: a formal apology, mandatory training on diversity and inclusion, potential legal consequences for repeated violations. It felt thorough, but the sting of James's actions still made her wonder if it would be enough. "This looks good," Ava finally said, choosing her words with care. "But remember, words and policies only matter if people believe in them. If they're just typed on paper and forgotten, the problem remains." Mark's gaze flickered with determination. "I understand. We'll follow through. I've built this restaurant's reputation on excellent service, and I won't let one person's bias tarnish everything my family has worked for." Chef Bernard cleared his throat gently. "Miss Richards, Mr. Richards, please know that the staff supports any initiative that fosters respect. I've already spoken with several of my team members. They're appalled at what happened." He paused, sincerity evident in his eyes. "I believe this can be a turning point for Stonebridge, to truly become a leader in inclusive fine dining." Ava exhaled slowly, some of the tension in her shoulders easing. "I appreciate that. Truly. But let's not forget that James might not be the only one with biases. They can run deep, sometimes unspoken." Carlton gave a firm nod. "We're prepared to work with you if you need insight or resources on inclusivity training. But I won't hesitate to escalate this if we find any more instances of discrimination here." Mark met Carlton's gaze squarely. "Understood. We're prepared to do whatever it takes." A knock sounded, and the young server appeared once, again. She held a small tray with 2 crystal flutes of sparkling cider. With a timid smile, she placed them on the table. "Chef Bernard insisted," she said softly. "He wanted to offer a toast for a more positive future. If you're open to it." Ava offered a faint smile, touched by the gesture. "Thank you," she said, lifting her glass. Carlton did the same, while Mark and Chef Bernard discreetly took a step back to give them privacy. For a moment, Ava stared at the bubbles rising in the pale liquid, remembering how she'd been dismissed not an hour ago. She'd arrived expecting a simple evening out, never guessing the fight for basic dignity she'd face. Now she found herself on the cusp of a resolution. Imperfect, but forward-moving. Gently, she tapped her glass against her father's. "To a better night," Ava murmured, voice laced with cautious hope. And in the quiet warmth of that private nook, it felt as though some measure of healing, however small, was finally beginning. Dinner that evening was unlike anything Ava had imagined when she first arrived at Stonebridge Steakhouse. The private table gleamed with fresh linens, and Chef Bernard personally oversaw every dish, a symphony of flavors from tender filet mignon to exquisitely seasoned vegetables. Despite the lingering tension, the meal was undeniably extraordinary. Each course served as a reminder that sincere hospitality could still exist, even in a place marred by one person's prejudice. As dessert approached, a rich chocolate soufflé, crowned with fresh berries, Ava glanced around the dining nook. The staff moved with renewed purpose, almost determined to prove that James's behavior wasn't the restaurant's norm. A subtle hush enveloped the dining area, where guests now resumed their own conversations, some still throwing curious glances in her direction. Carlton set down his napkin. "Are you enjoying the meal, sweetheart?" he asked, a gentle smile, curving his lips. Despite the earlier ordeal, he seemed calmer now, as though he could finally exhale. Ava nodded, spooning a bit of the decadent soufflé onto her plate. "It's delicious," she admitted. "Chef Bernard is incredibly talented." She paused, meeting her father's gaze. "I just hope the changes Mark promised will really happen." Carlton covered her hand with his. "They will if we stay vigilant. Discrimination doesn't vanish overnight, but shining a light on it is the first step." Moments later, Mark Stonebridge himself quietly reappeared, carrying a small leather check presenter. He approached with a respectful incline of his head. "Mr. Richards, Ms. Richards, on behalf of Stonebridge, I'd like to waive all charges for tonight's dinner." "It's the least we can do after everything you've been through." Carlton took the check holder, flipping it open only to see an itemized list of dishes, each marked 0. "Thank you," he said, voice composed. "It's a generous gesture. We accept it. Not as hush money, but as a sign of your sincerity." Mark nodded earnestly. "You have my word. Stonebridge Steakhouse will implement every measure we discussed, and more, if necessary. We want to earn back your trust." Ava caught the note of genuine resolve in his voice. Though she couldn't erase the hurt of being judged unworthy, she felt a cautious optimism that lessons might indeed be learned. "I appreciate that," she said, her tone softer. "I'm not looking to punish the entire staff, but real accountability matters." From the corridor, Chef Bernard gave her a warm smile before disappearing into the kitchen, presumably to oversee another course for a different table. Watching him go, Ava realized how much one person's kindness could contrast sharply with another's cruelty, a fact that gave her both hope and a poignant sense of caution. Rising from her seat, she slipped her arm through Carlton's. Together, they followed Mark out toward the main foyer. Though some patrons were too engrossed in their meals to notice, a few offered polite nods as Ava passed, as if silently acknowledging the evening's tension. She tried to smile back, aware that genuine change needed more than polite gestures. It required ongoing commitment. At the entrance, James was nowhere to be seen. Ava assumed he'd been dismissed for the night or was in the back, dealing with the fallout of his actions. She wondered if their exchange had truly moved him to reconsider his biases, or if he was merely trying to save face. Time, she decided, would tell. Stepping into the cool night air, Ava inhaled deeply, as though shaking off the last shadows of the ordeal. Carlton pressed the remote to unlock his sleek sedan. Before getting in, he paused to look back at the restaurant's bright marquee sign glowing in the darkness. "You know," he said to Ava, voice thoughtful, "this isn't the first time. We've encountered prejudice. It won't be the last. But each time we have a chance to stand up, speak out, and make it a little harder for this kind of injustice to thrive." Ava nodded, her heart lighter than before. You're right, Dad. Tonight was exhausting, but it was also a reminder that staying silent only enables people like James. Together they slid into the car, the engine purring to life. As they pulled away from Stonebridge Steakhouse, Ava let her gaze linger on the place she'd once looked forward to visiting, now forever changed in her memory. Yet, beneath the sting of discrimination lay a newfound resolve. If even one person's perspective could shift, if one manager could learn from his grave mistake, then perhaps progress was truly possible. And that hope, however fragile, was enough to guide her forward.